Good evening, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Newbury, and I'm the director of the Serious Games Initiative at the Wilson Center. We are just celebrating our 20th anniversary, so very excited to be here today to talk about what we've done in those past 20 years, as well as uh, what our process is and how it might differ from a little bit in the wargaming community. A little bit about me and the Wilson Center, which I represent. So the Wilson Center is a federal instrumentality located here in Washington, D.C. We are chartered by Congress. We are strictly nonpartisan. We also are named after the Wilson Center, or Woodrow Wilson in particular, because Woodrow Wilson was our first and only president with a PhD. And so instead of making another bridge or a statue for pigeons to land on, we decided to make a living memorial to President Wilson, focusing on his international policy contributions. So we focus a lot on international issues at the Wilson Center, as well as thematic issues such as science and technology and serious games. So a little bit about the Serious Games Initiative and how it orients towards the broader field of serious games. I'll define that a little bit later because I know that serious games can be used in a lot of different contexts, but the Serious Games Initiative at the Wilson Center, first of all, we coined the term serious games in the digital age with Ben and Dave Rajewski back in 2002. They wrote a white paper on how games can be used in this new digital age for broader impact, broader engagement, especially around education and other sort of pro-social needs. And we really follow in that legacy. So we communicate science and policy complexities through gaming. We have done some tabletop gaming, but a lot of our focus is on the digital space and broad impacts therein. My background before coming to the Wilson Center is I have a PhD in communication from Cornell University. I've been studying games though in the academic sphere, if you will, from undergraduate on up. My undergraduate thesis is actually about a women's only guild. It was an anthro assignment and an honors thesis, and I had to explain to a bunch of classic anthropology professors the internet and how people can organize online. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as a social scientist in this space. One of the hats I wear in addition to being the director of the Serious Games Initiative is I also lead what's called the Federal Games Guild. So anyone with a Govy address or a contractor within government can join the guild. It is a informal community of practice across different US federal agencies and instrumentalities. We have colleagues from name your favorite alphabet soup, whether it's the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Institutes of Health, NASA. I don't want to strictly stick to the ends, but I won't go too much further from there. And as well as institutions like the Wilson Center, the Smithsonian, and others. We all orient towards games a little bit differently in the Federal Games Guild. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more, but the larger focus is on how games can be used to meet various agency goals, initiatives, and objectives. So if you're from the Department of Education, you might be funding a lot of opportunities in educational technology, games being one of them. Or some of my colleagues and I, we actually do this crazy thing of making and designing and researching games. So just a little bit about how I define serious games and also how I orient to the serious games space in general. As I hinted at before, we really follow along in the legacy of Ben Sawyer, but we also work within the system of like civil service as well as educational fields. A lot of tied to pedagogy is in our blood of serious games. So serious games, loosely defined, is a game that is designed, used, or modified for a purpose other than entertainment. And I use this broad definition because a lot of communities of practice focus on education, but they also might focus on art, expression, advocacy, etc. And I'll talk a little bit more about impact later of games, but we're really focused here on the meaningful component of serious games. There's a couple of different ways that serious games can go about, as it were. One is, first of all, they can be designed from the get-go. And this is really a lot of the games that the Wilson Center uses, games that are designed from day one as a impact game or a social impact game, an educational game, if you will. So, for example, we have the plastic pipeline here. We designed this game to teach about environmental policies and use the mechanics of game design to help support those learning goals more broadly. You may also encounter games, though, that are just used. There may be a commercial-based game. I see later on in the year, you guys are going to have somebody talking about D&D and other tabletop role-playing games. Those have been used by educators for years to teach everything from Beowulf to other forms of literature and history. But you also might use off-the-shelf games in the digital space like Civilization or Redemption to teach history. And there's a couple of studies on that I'm happy to dive into. It's not how the Wilson Center orients necessarily towards serious games, but I think it's a really core definition because a lot of these games rely on seeing where people are excited and engaged with games and really trying to meet them there where they're standing. So Minecraft is another example of this, that a lot of educators saw that their students were using Minecraft and tried to build worlds that they would want to engage with in playful learning experiences. So that's just one way of orienting towards serious games. And it goes, one thing I want to caveat here is one of the reasons why there was this big push 20 years ago for serious games, not only with our initiative, but other festivals popped up around that time. There was a push from the White House to use game jams and other forms of media engagement. One of the key themes from a lot of that early engagement is how do we meet and how do we engage people in environments that they're already happy to be in and sort of make those playful experiences that can expose them to either pedagogy or like learning experiences or other forms of positive social impact. The last category, when I think of serious games, are games that are commercial games, but that are modded or incorporate an educational pro-social outcome as part of the experience later on. So I mentioned Minecraft. Now there's a Minecraft Education Edition that is really cultivated towards the classroom learning experience. Other games such as Assassin's Creed have employed historians to help create these discovery tours. The first one was added on after the fact, but the recent editions I think are more incorporated as part of the game design from the get-go. And then there's other forms of this pro-social or sort of positive outcome focusing on, such as EVE Online, which has this whole project discovery quest line. And in the project discovery quest line, you actually contribute to scientific research as part of your endeavors in EVE Online. If anyone plays EVE Online, kudos to you. They've made a lot of really critical health discoveries. They've partnered with research institutions and medical research institutions specifically. Some of their latest work is focused on COVID, but the first packet, I believe, they thought the data itself, what they would do within project discovery, would take about 3 months to do. And the players in crowdsourcing this actually took only 3 weeks to accomplish the goals for the researchers. So games can be a powerful tool, not just for individual outcomes, but for these broader scale community projects as well. What unites all of these definitions of serious games is that they move beyond strictly entertainment to aim for types of impact. And when I think of types of impact, I think of impact in both individual impact and collective impact. So in the individual impact, the three most studied bodies of research are how games can be used to help leverage knowledge and skill development, but also motivation. And this is ties to a lot of our games as well as games I see broader in the field. Motivation you can unpack into trying to make something less like that is very obscure or intangible or hard to engage with, let's say public policy, for example, and making it fun and exciting. I think of it as really lowering that barrier of entry so that after playing the game, the idea is that the learner will actually want to learn more or want to be more engaged in that topic area. Then I think, especially in tabletop exercises, a lot of focus is on knowledge, actually imparting educational outcomes, and also developing skills and training as part of those uh, endeavors. Duolingo would be a great example of skill development itself. But then there's all these collective impacts. And when I say collective, I mean they go beyond just motivating an individual, having someone learn about a thing and actually retain those facts or developing a skill. Those are things like raising awareness. A lot of games can be used to amplify voices that aren't typically seen in a digital space. So for example, a lot of games, there's been a lot of work in it using games since Eli Media's uh, work with Never Alone in amplifying Indigenous voices through games. There's been a recent work also in highlighting efforts around Ukraine and also history. So these are awareness building exercises. I mentioned supporting research. So one way to think of that is in literally crowdsourcing information for research. Um, but then there's also this broader essence of making research more tangible, which is a lot of what I do. Um, so I should say for the Wilson Center, our flagship game, if you will forgive it, the pun is the Fiscal Ship. And prior to it, there was Budget Hero, which really was a pivotal game at the time. I wasn't here when it was developed, but it was pivotal in the fact that it was one of the first public policy nonpartisan games. And it took what could only be exciting in the Washington, D.C. area, which is the federal budget, and turned it into a game. One of the interesting legacies of Budget Hero is that it wasn't designed just for kids, although in there was a lot of middle school to high school pickup for it. But it was also a game that adults could play. And at the time, back in 2006 or so, that was pretty a radical notion that games are not just for children. Adults also would like to play games. And we really took that legacy of both formal learning and informal learning and put them into the Fiscal Ship. So the Fiscal Ship, you are challenged to play captain the fiscal ship and try to navigate us out of national debt. It's based off of a 25-year projection from the Congressional Budget Office data, which is publicly available data. And you get to set the goals that you would like to meet. So if you want to shore up national security, you can set that as a meta goal for yourself. And you also could set another a whole array of different ones. So like fighting climate change is another one. We really, again, are a nonpartisan institution. So we really wanted to provide the agency for the individuals to create their own goals and really allow that to help them learn based on their own starting points and where their passions are. So you can only win the game if you meet your goals and then also decrease national debt. The whole meta conversation here is that decreasing national debt over time is a nonpartisan issue. And as a result, you can play it in about 15 minutes. It's strictly designed for both informal and classroom play, but around 4 million people have played our games about the US federal budget worldwide. There's a new edition out for specifically the election right now, so feel free to play it at fiscalship.org. And I'm happy to dive into a little bit more of that as well. Some of the other platforms that we've made recently, we've took a research topic from one of my colleagues, which is the question of literally what do we put up into space and why do we put it there? And some of that really relates to a lot of our orbits and what orbits we have access to. Where we put them in those orbits depends on some of the affordances of those orbits, as well as the technology that you're trying to get at. So on our Cross Kármán website, we focus on outlining some of the major orbits that are available for both government as well as commercial use. And you can click through and then dig a little bit deeper there of seeing exactly some of the big things that we put into orbit, like the International Space Station, for example. Recently, we've been working on this small topic around artificial intelligence, which I'm sure no one here has heard of, but we've been doing it for several years, probably since I started at the Wilson Center about 7 years ago, before AI was cool, as it were. But we have a couple of digital interactives that we've developed for what's called our Wilson Center Tech Labs, which is a 6-week seminar series on AI specifically for legislative and executive staff. And part of that is they get a lecture from a leading expert in the field, but we also provide a hands-on learning opportunity. So one of the very first concepts that were introduced in this lab is, what is a neural network and how does it learn? So a lot of neural networks by their nature are black boxed, how they act, how data is processed within them. But you can, we abstracted here with trying to demonstrate with blueberry muffins and chihuahuas, how you can increase the complexity and increase the amount of data, which increases the amount of learning that happens. So that is one of the, that's based on a dialogue with one of our experts who leads the labs and trying to really make sure that it aligned well with his lectures there, but it's freely and publicly available online. Another topic that's really popular right now in AI is this topic of bias, particularly bias within algorithms or data bias. So one of the other components that we took on was, and I'm noticing that ignore the description, but here we focused on really trying to underscore a actual research paper from Obermeyer and al. That was published and was really pivotal for the field around a medical algorithm that was being actually implemented across the nation. In this algorithm, it was, spoiler alert, biased. And it was particularly biased because of the way it operationalized and the way it was trained to operationalize high-risk patients. So it was supposed to identify and flag patients that were needing to go into a high-risk program. So let's say you have pre-cancer or diabetes or some cardiac issues. There were specific programs set up to provide you with additional care as part of this care network. And as part of this, the data was trained, or the algorithm was trained to actually identify people based on how frequently they went to the doctor, how much they paid for healthcare coverage, these sort of indicators that might suggest that you were potentially a high risk person if you're going to the doctor frequently, for example, or you're investing a lot of time and money into doctors, it might suggest that you are sicker than the average bear, as it were. What it didn't account for is the historical inequities within our own medical system that prevented or would put pause on people of color, for example, in accessing a lot of these healthcare services. So it's a tricky game, but it is multiplayer also. We designed it specifically so that it could be played multiplayer or single player. And you're slowly introduced to more and more data, much like you might train an algorithm. But again, very abstracted. There's a lot of inside jokes on the bios of the characters there. And then also in our AI line, coming soon, we're going to have a game on deepfake mitigation. Now, this was based off of a series of interviews that we did with experts in the field. So the last one was on an actual published paper. This one we did independent research, interviewing 17 cybersecurity experts, computer science researchers, nonprofit leaders, government employees, etc., all based in the United States, I believe, and focusing on how do we not identify deep fakes, but what is the next step? What do we need to do to help decrease the risks of deep fakes? And there were fairly, as a qualitative researcher, it was really interesting because the themes lined up pretty well across interviews. For example, most people talked about watermarking provenance marking, which is a way of sort of rubber stamping if something has a certain percentage of synthetics. And then another one was sort of the legal routes to mitigating deep fakes, some of the educational or literacy routes to mitigating deep fakes, data concerns, those sorts of things. So we put all of that data into a big system called Atlas TI, coded it, and then we actually took the high level strengths and weaknesses of these particular mitigation techniques and put them into the game. It's where you have to, with the help of a cat, who is based off of my intern Kristen's cat, Kit Kat, help identify the strengths and weaknesses of various deepfake mitigation techniques. It's not out yet, but stay tuned. We're very excited. And I should flag that AI's Anatomy and this game, The Plastic Pipeline, this is the last game I'll talk about. But this game in particular, we've submitted it for DSET, which is based in Bristol, UK. They have a serious games challenge and showcase and challenge Europe. And then we've also submitted it to ITSEC, which is based in Orlando, Florida, for their serious games showcase and challenge. And they were both finalists. The Plastic Pipeline actually won for the award for Best for Government Audience. And then we also won the inaugural award for Best Environmental Impact from the 2024 Games for Change festival, which if you haven't heard of Games for Change, it's a really great resource for a lot of these pro-social advocacy educational games that are out there. So this was actually, I partnered with our China environment team here at the Wilson Center, and we hoovered up a bunch of policies and put them into, I was at the time playing a lot of Animal Crossing, so very inspired by Animal Crossing, a game that we wanted to be global in impact. So we were very careful about testing a lot of our early designs with a broad range of interns. We have a lot of international interns here at the Wilson Center, as well as ages to make sure that we were getting sort of the right tone. But we've tested this particular game both in the US as well as in Vietnam and Indonesia, and some of the impacts are really interesting with it. It's a very classic learning game. You go through and you try to interview people to collect policy information, pros and cons as you go. I played a lot of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego as a kid, so this was very inspired by that sort of early arcade game where you're interviewing people. I probably played Carmen Sandiego in space, honestly, the most, as opposed to the early gens. But in any case, as you go through, you pass policies, and it impacts both the policies in other areas. So it'll block off different policies depending on what you choose in each area. And then another aspect of it is we have a mini game in there. I would challenge everyone to play that one. It's about nerdle policies, and I'm happy to explain what nerdles are more deeply in the question and answer, but it got our team very excited. And the meta goal of that is to teach people that ocean cleanup doesn't necessarily work, especially for small plastics. So it just gets exponentially harder, kind of like an arcade game. And yeah, it was a definite hit with all of our audiences, both US and abroad. So I wanted to explain a little bit more deeply with plastic pipeline. I'm happy to go back to this and explain it with any questions in the question and answer period. But broadly speaking, it's not a linear process here. But we start with policy research, and we start really trying to figure out what we want the learning goals to be of a particular game. So in the plastic pipeline, one of the things that I heard a lot from our colleagues in the China Environment Forum is that most people are sort of stuck at the consumer level of practice. So they hear about plastic fees and they hear about plastic bag bans, and there's a lot of pressure on the consumer to be the solution for a global issue on plastic pollution. In point of fact, there's a lot of upstream, so like at the production level, and a lot of downstream happening at the like waste of plastic, a single-use plastics life cycle, if you will, that can really help sort of negate a lot of plastic pollution. And those are what like are being discussed at the UN level, Inc., et cetera, Department of State's involved with that, but really trying to focus on making those parts of policy that people aren't necessarily engaged with on the daily basis, but making them exciting and making them interesting, but also just accessible, like an introduction to those concepts. So once we've sort of laid out the landscape of what types of policies we want to talk about, we also were iterating and designing simultaneously. We worked with the great people at Fable Vision Studios. And there's just a whole scale of different prototypes that we went through. We tested and iterated on the design. Again, I mentioned we recruited interns very early on to help, who weren't on our teams, to help understand how do we make environmental policy, particularly this particular topic in policy, exciting and engaging, but also not too depressing for people to want to do something and feel more empowered. And then we did formal testing as sort of the end stage, but we're looking to now add additional resources to the game. But the testing really was a way of saying, did we make both the design of the game accessible, the learning goals, did we actually hit those learning goals, and what sort of feedback can we get from our core audiences, which are college students on up. We did testing for the plastic pipeline in both the US and Vietnam colleges. We had over 229 participants, and we did what's called an intervention style of research. So we had a pre-survey and a post-survey. They were very much the same in both, as in they are identical for our measurement purposes. We wanted to see a before and after change. This is a very common style of research for serious games, where you do that sort of in place sort of testing. What I'm seeing more and more of is also longitudinal studies, so maybe following up 2 to 3 weeks later, We didn't have that luxury, unfortunately, mostly because I don't reside in Vietnam. But these students, some of the aggregation of our findings were that after playing the game, first of all, yes, we had knowledge acquisition. They could name more policies. We asked them to name 3 policies before and after. They also felt like they knew more. So a lot of that was focused on self-efficacy. So did they feel more empowered after playing the game? And it did increase their interest in environmental policy. They were more interested in politics writ broadly. They were also, interestingly, more confident in their ability to impact public policy. So these were all positive outcomes. They had just a general sense that an individual could make an impact, which is one of the things that we were looking for as far as trying to empower the next generation of environmental policy interest. So you can see here from some of the pictures, some of our testing. It's mobile friendly. It's also computer, laptop friendly. My colleague Jennifer Turner, as part of this, gave a brief introduction, and then we gave them the survey afterwards for what is the state of plastic pollution. And she likes to say that US and China are tied for #1 slot in most pollution. And then afterwards, we had a debrief with the students, really trying to unpack and understand what they thought about the game. We took qualitative field notes as also part of this process. So really trying to understand how they took the game, the lessons learned, and also how we can improve in the future. Because no game is ever done. And I think that is it. So I included a QR code there if you would like to see our games or see more about our initiatives around artificial intelligence and serious games more broadly.
Hey, thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you for everyone for being patient today. Today has been a troublesome lecture with some of the audience members. Hopefully, we have solved that. I have enabled the chat function for people to throw in their questions. But as we get started, Elizabeth, I want to ask you, like, as you guys do your gaming, what is sort of your process internally to the Wilson Center in terms of how you guys find sponsors, design the scope and objectives, and sort of the game design, and then to the coding portion?
Yeah, so I will say there's no one way to make a game, even at the Wilson Center. First of all, some of our games, like the Fiscal Ship, you probably saw that there was a range of sponsors, people who have funded the game down at the bottom. One of them is the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. There's also the William and Helen Flora Foundation and Richard Lounsbury Foundation. So that would be an example of these funders coming together to help support a broad scale digital game. And obviously the first resource needed is as much as game developers in this field are very kind and giving individuals the funding to actually make the game. We've had a wide range of different experiences. I didn't even dive into some of the tabletop workshops that we've done. So it can really range the gamut of like how much you need for the game. But for like the Fiscal Ship, we're talking several funders. For things like our AI games, that's part of a larger grant that we have to help support our AI work more broadly. And then once we've identified that, as well as what do we want to say as far as these games are concerned, what is the research saying, what do we want to amplify as part of that research, because we are a think tank and it almost all comes back down to gaps in research and how we want to make sure that we're helping support people's understanding of those gaps. Once we've identified those broad scale, we'll either, if we're like partners on a grant, we might have identified a game developing company to go in with us on things. So like the plastic pipeline, for example, we identified very early on that we wanted to have as part of the grant process, because we went to National Geographic Society, we worked with Fable Vision Studios on the grant applications itself and identified them as a partner early on. But sometimes we do open calls, which are called open requests for proposals, and try to find new folks to help us with the games. So in those cases, we review them just like you would any sort of contractor for a federal government agency. And I lost the tail end of your question, Sebastian. I'm sorry.
The coding portion, because a lot of your games are digital and accessible on your website or on
Yeah.
other associated websites. So how do you guys go through the coding process of do you guys build a manual version or do you build straight for digital?
Yeah, so we build almost strictly straight for digital, and part of that has been informed a lot by COVID practices. So a lot of serious game companies or indie game companies are dispersed. So it depends on the practice of the individual company. So I'll give Fablevision actually as an example. When we first started that project, we went in for a 2-day workshop with them to help not pen and paper prototype, but to at least whiteboard some brief concepts. But since then, since like after COVID and the pandemic, I think we're seeing more of a trend towards digital conferencing, Zoom calls or Google Hangout calls, etc., to do that sort of initial prototyping and sketchboarding. Um, with the coding itself, I am a team of 2 people at the Wilson Center. So we don't do a ton of internal coding. We mostly rely on these companies to do the coding for us. Um, our coding runs the full gamut, but right now in the field, I can say that Unity and Unreal Engine are both pretty dominant as far as like how people might code a game. And then we work very closely with our backend servers and our company that runs our server process to make sure the code doesn't crash anything. So it's a little bit more elaborate than Kafka style of uh, locking 3 monkeys in a room and asking them to try to get Hamlet or something written. But we have a whole broad team who helps us work on from design to coding to server implementation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. So actually, I'll ask two questions that are related. First, which is, does the Wilson Center ever sponsor conferences or gatherings for serious gamers?
Yes and no. So we are recently, there's been a little bit of a change since COVID. We've put on game arcades. We actually just put one on last week where we showcased a range of games, not just our own, but some from the Federal Games Guild community, some from the broader DC area serious games field. We had an array of board games actually. We had Votes for Women demoed there. We also had Wingspan and the new game Undergrove by Elizabeth Hargrave. We also had Jason from Twilight Struggle there. As far as conferences are concerned, we don't put on as many conferences with a capital C as we might put on panels and events of that nature to try to showcase the broader field of practice and answer direct questions around serious games. I'm always happy to partner with other organizations or academic institutions who are interested in game-based approaches and specifically serious games and how games can be an impact. But panels are one way. We've also started to do more social media outreach. So focusing on interviews, we actually have a series of interviews coming up with 11 experts from the field, both from academia, from industry, and government, who are emphasizing the use of serious games or have been in the serious games field for quite a while and can, as a part of our 20th anniversary celebration. And they talk about the past, the present, and the future of serious games as part of those interviews. But good question.
So a related question is, roughly how many people are there in the Federal Games Guild, and what are some of the engagement strategies used to get government departments interested in joining this game?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have around 100 uh, folks from the broader field. And one of the tricky things is that with the Federal Games Guild, that a lot of people orient towards games depending on what their position is, depending on what their agencies' goals are differently. So within the Federal Games Guild, there's largely three bodies of practice. And I like to put people into categories, but please know that as I'm saying this, there are always exceptions to the rule. There's agencies that will fund serious games or game-based approaches. So the big hitters in that tend to be Department of Education, who I mentioned before, the National Endowment for the Arts, actually, especially for community-based approaches to games, the National Institutes for Health, actually the game Foldit, which now has Nobel laureate attachments to it, which is a protein folding game, was funded through the National Institutes for Health and has been one of the like longest standing serious games probably out there that's research based. Then there are bodies of practice that focus on more the design and implementation of games. They tend to be a smaller minority of agencies that are focused on that particular issue. Notably, it's the Wilson Center. Also, the Department of State has been, EPA and a few others have also been making games. I believe we had Shocks and Stressors, who was demoing at the arcade I mentioned. It was from the Department of State. And then we also have folks who are researching games, and that's an even smaller minority. I think the number is two of us, more or less. There's one of my colleague at the CDC who does a lot of research in virtual reality implementation, especially around coal miners. His name is Tim Orr, and they focus on using VR as a way to understand the ways to train coal miners without actually sending them into the mines, which I feel like is a great use of virtual reality to create a space where they can haptically go through the training without the high risk to themselves. With the largest majority of folks in the Federal Games Guild really focus more on just learning about the broader field. We're a bunch of nerds. We love seeing research. We love amplifying research and trying to understand that. And one of the things that it kind of goes back to that answer of like strategies to get government departments interested in both games itself as well as joining this community of practice is just to learn what's out there and what the cool technologies are coming out or cool implementations of technologies that are coming out. Those are kind of the biggest things that I think would help with engagement.
So when you guys do your game design, have you ever leveraged AI to help design any of your games? And if so, what are some of the strengths that AI assistance in game design?
Um, so we have not, to my knowledge, used generative AI in any capacity for our games. And part of that is the novelty of the technology, wanting to be very cautious and ethical with our implementation of that. And then the second component of it is we are abstracting from artificial intelligence. There's a core concept that I believe in where it's to make something accessible. Sometimes it's not necessarily just about engaging with that technology, but meeting people where they stand to start with. So coming up with some sort of common ground and starting point where it's not diving deep into the technology, which can be very scary for some folks, but really trying to set them up for success with engaging with some of these broader concepts around the technology. So like bias in AI. We didn't use generative AI to create that game. Um, bec because we were focusing more on making a playful experience about the ethics and the concerns around algorithmic bias within the game itself. That doesn't mean in the future we won't necessarily use AI or like make a backbone. So, for example, our neural networks game could have potentially implemented a neural network as part of the learning process. We wanted to make it visual and accessible and lower the barrier of entry for it at the moment.
So before I jump to the next question, since this is sort of related, what are some of the challenges you guys often or have encountered when designing games for the Wilson Center?
I think one of the biggest challenges is I work with really intelligent people, and I don't mean this to like humble brag, but when you are a deep expert within a field, it is sometimes very hard to come up 5, 10 levels to make a broad scale digital game. So for a more accessible broad game, so a game that 4 million people or even thousands of people will play, it has to be at a level of accessibility that is not someone who is one of the top 5 researchers within the field. Like it's not at that level. So a lot of it is the paring down of information. And one of the to put within the game, and one of the solutions we've had is that we're using these games to help motivate people after playing the game to feel more comfortable to dive into this topic, to feel more comfortable that they might be able to read a 5-page white paper or a 10-page white paper on an issue that they are particularly passionate about after playing the game. We're not trying to turn everyone into uh wonks, although we welcome anyone who would like the secret handshake of policy wonks. But we really try to make sure that it's accessible so that anyone can walk away with feeling more empowered and comfortable with the topic area.
So question says public policy involving change requires one to develop explicitly or implicitly a logical theory of change. Can feedback from playtesting a game help refine that theory of change?
I would tentatively say yes, and I'll go back to the like origin of the Serious Games Initiative. Many of these resources are still accessible online, but we used to, before my day, uh, write up reports on how people were orienting towards particular policies within Budget Hero. So what policies were the most popular, um, what the age distribution was, making those sorts of transparent, making it very much like a poll on budgetary policy. The utility of that is, well, making like an understanding of what people are gravitating towards in the game as potential solutions, especially for navigating national debt. One of the critiques I've heard of that, though, is that the sampling. So especially if you talk to economists, economists tend to want a generalizable sample. Well, if people are self-selecting to play a game, it's not really a generalizable sample from there. But I think that there's a lot within what we know now about digital games and how we can use digital games now to really help us understand how people are orienting towards particular games or particular policies, or just what they do engage with and what they also don't engage with. Because I think that's also a very critical part of our ethos is it's as important to know where people are going as well as what they might be intimidated to engage with as a policy. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of room for that. We haven't had any recent examples, though, of using it in that sort of a sense.
What are some things that we can look forward to about hearing in the interview series that's coming out?
So in the interview series that's coming out, some things that you can look forward to hearing. That's a great question. So in the interview series, we interviewed a range of folks from different avenues who've been in the serious games field since its onset, or as close to as we could get for the digital age, especially that 20-year marker. And some of the things that came out, especially from the past, is this idea that we had to convince people, first of all, that games could be used as a power for education, as they could be used for a pro-social impact. And then there's also a lot of conversation around how excited people were to use games in that sort of capacity. The people who had already drunk the Kool-Aid, as it were, how excited they were to be able to reach so many people using playful technology and really engaging them again where they stood. To the present, I think a lot of the themes that came up were how we're still negotiating a lot of the same conversations, still having to convince people that games can be used for good. Um, a good example of this is also just how games can be used also for not just kids, but also for adult learners. And then also hearing an array of favorite games that are out right now. That's a good uh, theme from the present. AI does come up in a fair number of interviews, not as many as you would think, actually. We're also really interested in the capacity of virtual reality or augmented reality. Also very much interested in concerns around diversity and inclusion within the field, or how we can make sure to use games for problems that are really we're tackling today, both from a policy perspective as well as the broader field. It really does vary a little bit based on who we talk to. But I'll give one example of Professor Lindsay Grace out of Florida is using games in game jams a lot. Game jams actually came up a fair bit. This could have been a sampling error on my part. I also interviewed the new director of Global Game Jam, Maria Burns Ortez, and she also talks about a lot of game jam opportunities, particularly that it's being used by our embassies abroad to try to engage people around particular topic areas, whether that's learning or in the environment, etc., and really trying to understand what the power of game jams are as a community building practice and as a sort of uh, building this international community of people who are working together across country borders for a common issue, but also how game jams are being used for um, the development. Like, how can we expect them to be? Can you get a game out of a game jam? Short answer, it depends. It depends on how you structure the game jam. This actually coincides with a little bit of a research that we also have coming out within hopefully the next month on game jams and how they are used and what sort of impacts you can understand from game jams.
So this is one of the questions I always ask game designers whenever they join us on this webinar series is, if you had unlimited funding and all the support you needed, what game would you design?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm really interested in how we can leverage technologies right now to help support research questions. So kind of going back to the question on public policy, are there avenues to use games that can both democratize science and scientific research and get people feeling more comfortable with the ins and outs of scientific research? Um, and how that could be implemented in commercial games. So if I could pick anything, like how would I take name the one of the top grossing games out there, whether it's from
Don.
academic, yeah, done. And how could I insert or create a quest line or a part of the experience that introduces people to core scientific research, whether that's space or whether that's quantum physics or what have you. I think there's a lot of avenues where games use those concepts as part of the backdrop for their games, but not necessarily uh, interrogating scientific research as part of that. And I think if you made it a little bit more Bill Nye the Science Guy, as it were, it would be a tremendous avenue for both formal learning, but also informal learning. A lot of our gamers are getting older, and if we can combine play and a little bit of learning and engagement, that would, I think, go a long way.
No, that's a great answer. I love the idea of learning how to do quantum physics via game, as a game nerd myself.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel used it as a backdrop for Ant-Man. Why not? Why not put it into a game?
I love it. So I'd like to give you any last minute qu comments or your last sort of insights that you want to share with the crowd before we end our evening today. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I would say anyone looking into a, designing either war games, as Sebastian, that your group pioneers that a lot in a lot of ways, or serious games more digitally focused. I think the big key is not to lose sight of what you want people to walk away with. I tend to think of it in both tangible learning goals. So, what is the core facts that I want them to walk away with knowing? So, yes, plastic pollution is a problem. There are solutions. Here they are. But what's the next level? What's the sort of feel that you want people to walk away with? What is the essence that you want them to sort of understand that isn't a tangible factoid, but more of a feeling or an ethos that surrounds that particular body of research? It could, a lot of our emphasis is on, yes, this is a very scary topic. Deep fakes are scary, potentially. Uh, Plastic pollution is scary. Our other policies that we tackle are a little bit daunting, but there's something that you can do about it. There's something that can be done. There are smart people who are discussing these topics, and we want to build your efficacy and your voice to be part of that conversation.
That is a great high note to end our webinar here on. On the behalf of the Georgetown University Wargaming Society, Elizabeth, I want to thank you for sharing your evening, your time, your expertise, and your patience this time around. And hopefully, your next time you join us, it will be a better experience. Thank you again for sharing your work here with us at Georgetown.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I love being here.